friends. This is my first hybrid presentation. So thank you for all you wonderful people here and you wonderful people out there. My name is Anna. I am the founder and CEO of On the Goga. We are a corporate wellness company based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. But we serve clients globally, and our motto is pretty simple. It's happy people do great things. So what we attempt to do day in and day out is work with organizations of all sizes, all industries, all geographies to develop cultures and well-being programs that actually support the health and happiness of their teams through things like emotional well-being, skill building, and cooking classes, and leadership development. Pretty much anything that you can imagine would make work suck less. That's what we help companies to do. And I was actually just talking with one of our audience members who's here about the future and futurism and how the future of work is really kind of centered around this idea that how we experience our days at work plays a big influence in that work that we create and that work product that we put out. And so we really believe it on the Goga that helping to give employees that better, more positive day-to-day experience is a win-win for everyone involved. And that is why, because our motto is having people do great things, we always start our presentations with a picture of an adorable animal. So here's a dog being very entrepreneurial. But today, we are going to be talking about the entrepreneur's mindset. So here's what we're going to talk about today. Also, just to give you some ground rules, I love to have conversations. And so I am going to be asking you guys questions who are sitting here. I'm going to be asking you guys questions who are sitting at home. And throw your answers in the chat box if you're at home. And the wonderful Emily will read your answers out to me. If you're here in the room, you can either shout them out and I'll repeat them into the microphone, or if we can get that microphone going back and forth, we'll do it like that. But we're going to go around and just do maybe like a little bit of an introduction. I know there's a lot of people here, so if you're sitting at home, go ahead and get a head start. I would love to know your name, maybe what you do in work or in life day to day, and one quality that you think makes an exceptional leader. So if you're at home, go ahead and type that in the chat box if you would be so willing. And Emily, we can start with you.
All right. So my name is Emily. I work with Venture Café in Philadelphia, help with our community program and meeting entrepreneurs every week. It is my passion. I would say the skill that makes a good leader.
Yeah.
I would say brutal honesty. Brutal honesty.
Yes, I love that. Okay, awesome. Let's do a microphone run.
We have someone in the chat. We have Amy. She's a nurse practitioner. Nurse, and she believes that authenticity means a great deal.
Absolutely, and a lot of the times authenticity feels a little bit like brutal honesty in certain moments. So I feel like that's a good connection there. Should we just take it down the line? You guys can't see here, but we got a few people in the audience over here. Oh, Timothy. Oh, I know Timothy. Hello, Timothy. Timothy is a people ops coordinator at On the Goga, and he believes empathy is a quality that makes an amazing leader. Wonderful, Timothy. I'm so glad you're here. All right.
Hi, I'm Sean.
Sean.
I'm a art curator and museum consultant. But I think creativity is a quality.
I love that, Sean. Bringing in creativity from that museum curation side, absolutely. Beautiful. All right, let's pass it down. Welcome. We're just saying our name, what we do in work or in life, and one quality that you think makes an exceptional leader.
Well, how much I was a programmer at Penn and L3 before that. Now I'm just going around trying to learn some programming languages.
Awesome. And what do you think makes a great leader?
Someone who can pick people who are even smarter than he is.
Yeah, someone who can pick a team that's smarter than they are.
It doesn't get jumped.
Yes, love that.
You don't have to be smart stuff.
I love that. Those are all amazing qualities. All right, pass it along. Oh, we've got one in the chat here. We got Lewis, adjunct professor, teaching product design. I'd love to know, Lewis, what do you think makes a great leader? Start in the chat. All right, who's next?
Listening skills.
Yes, absolutely. Listening skills, active listening. Yes, listening without just waiting to have that moment to talk. Love that.
And Bob, semi-retired, like that's software engineer, manage, background with math and science. I think a good leader is somebody that has the ability to create good work.
Oh yeah, that's great. Someone who has the ability to create goodwill, right? And that, especially as we'll talk a little bit more about today, especially when things get challenging, can be extremely hard, right? A good leader is someone that no matter, they often say that there are peacetime CEOs and there are wartime CEOs, right? And a great leader can maintain a level of goodwill no matter what's going on within the organization. I love that. That's so great. Okay, so that was our intro session. Now we know who each other are. And what else are we going to talk about today? So we're going to start by talking about why the heck being an entrepreneur, whether you're starting your own business or whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you are just looking for ways to learn new things, even if you're semi-retired, right? This idea of embracing new challenges, taking on new projects and activities, creating something out of nothing. Why the heck is that so challenging, right? Then we're going to talk about, weave that into a little bit of the conversation of the entrepreneurial journey. And we're going to talk about some specific skill sets that we can see through the research actually make us more psychologically and physiologically able to handle the stressors that come with being an entrepreneur. So, what makes entrepreneurship so damn challenging, right? We know if it were easy, everyone would do it. What makes it so hard? Well, this is what I like to call the emotional journey of entrepreneurs as we think it's gonna go, right? So you can see here on the screen, we start, we're like, all right, here we go. This is gonna be amazing. I'm just gonna put a lot of hard work into it. And then you start to hear like, well, there might be a lot of work here to do, but you start to slowly see things taking off. You're like, all right, I'm getting the hang of this. And then we're like, wow, I'm really getting some traction. This is going amazing. Things are really taking off. And you just have like unlimited success, right? That's the concept. That's what we idealize. That's what we think should happen. One of my favorite quotes in the entire world is that if you should too much, you will should all over yourself and it'll be a big mess. So let's talk a little bit more about what actually happens emotionally when we're on the entrepreneur's journey. And this is actually a graph that I have adapted from a great post that was, I think it was like a few years ago, I saw this by a man named John Saddington, and he called this the emotional journey of creating anything great. So here's how it actually goes, right? You set up, you're like, oh man, I've got this great idea. I'm gonna do this. This is gonna be amazing. I'm so smart. So you start working. And then we get into what I like to affectionately refer to as the ramen noodle phase. This is where you start to go, okay, it's a little harder than I was anticipating it's gonna be, but that's okay. I like working 14 hours a day because I'm an entrepreneur and this is what I signed up for, right? You really get to the point where at some point you're like, whoa, this is a lot harder than I was anticipating it was gonna be. And then we arrive at what I also affectionately like to refer to as the existential crisis, or the deep, dark swamp of despair, where we start to think, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing, or I have no idea what to do next. Now, the deep, dark swamp of despair doesn't feel good. It doesn't smell good. It doesn't look very pretty. When we're in the deep, dark swamp of despair, we're having feelings of, oh my God, I can't do this. I don't know what to do next. Why did I even start? This is like just key opportunity to give up, right? Now, why do we have this existential crisis? Why, when we're doing anything great, whether we're starting a business, or we're starting a new job, or we're just trying to get ourselves to train for a half marathon, why do we start to think to ourselves, I shouldn't have even started? And why is that an inevitable part of this journey? Well, that's because entrepreneurship goes hand in hand with uncertainty. Now, uncertainty is pretty much your brain's worst enemy, right? Our brains hate uncertainty. What is uncertainty? Uncertainty is defined as not being able to be relied on, something that is not known or definite, right? Basically, when we think or expect one thing is going to happen, but then we're confronted with something else happening, that is a moment of uncertainty, right? Maybe that's simply that we think we're going to know what to do, and then we get into a moment where we think, I don't know what to do. That is a moment of uncertainty. Interestingly, uncertainty can take all sorts of shapes and forms. And especially when we want to start a business, when we want to do something that requires a massive skill set, that no one individual can be an expert in bookkeeping and sales and programming and marketing and copywriting and graphic design, we're going to ultimately hit a point, which is especially uncomfortable if you're out there as a high achiever, where we say, uh-oh, I don't know how to do this. I'm not the best person at this, right? Like you said, one of the qualities of a great leader is someone who can bring people in who are smarter than them, but when you're all alone and you're just starting out on that journey, that might not be an option for you. And so we're surrounded by feelings of uncertainty. Now, our brains, they really don't like this. Our brains are amazing, and they've evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to make predictions, right? They saw dark clouds off in the distance and heard a thunder rumble when they were 5 years old, and now when we walk out of our house and we see a dark cloud and we hear the thunder rumble, we say, I know what's gonna happen, and we walk back inside and get an umbrella, right? Our brains are programmed to make predictions and then do something about it, right? That's how we move through the world. That's what makes human beings incredible. We can know that just by the glint in someone's eye, that they might be having a certain emotion. We can know that, we can predict that if I, walk outside and sprint for a block and a half as fast as humanly possible, I'm probably gonna feel really exhausted and I might start sweating, right? Our brains view our ability to make predictions as a sense of safety, right? They're collecting all this information to keep us from literally dying, right? Getting eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or getting struck by lightning. And when they feel, our little brains, like they don't have enough inputs to make an accurate prediction of what's going to happen, our brains just lose it. In fact, H.P. Lovecraft says this beautifully: the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear. And the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. So when we are entrepreneurs and we are in the swamp, it's because we don't know what's going to happen, and our brain is trying to curl up into a little ball and say, oh my God, we're going to die, right? And so I just want to stop here to validate that if you've ever tried anything great, starting a business, trying a new hobby, going out and meeting a new person, right? Learning a new skill, you have inevitably found yourself in the deep, dark swamp of despair. And that's okay. In fact, it's great because as we'll learn today, the deep, dark swamp of despair is not something that we get to skip. In fact, it's an inherently important part of that entrepreneur's journey. But the trick is, how do we move through the swamp of despair without giving up? And if you think back at anything great that you've ever done in your life, I bet you can imagine one of these moments where you felt like giving up, and then you didn't, and you persisted, and then you had this incredible experience and you felt incredibly proud of yourself, right? But why don't we always do that? Well, because it's really, really hard. It's really hard to move through these feelings of uncertainty because your brain, everything in your brain and body is saying, oh my God, you might die here, right? So The cool news is that there are some psychological tools that we can learn to build a little metaphorical bridge across this deep, dark swamp of despair. It's still gonna smell like the swamp. It's still gonna look like the swamp. It's still gonna feel like the swamp, right? Because our bridge is just right directly over that swamp. But this bridge of persistence and courage enables us to move through the swamp without giving up and moving on to the next part of the journey. So, how do we do that? What builds this bridge? Well, it's not planks of wood and rope that you might find on the side of the road. It's actually a cognitive skill set. So, what we can learn from the research in psychology, from understanding how and looking at case studies of success and how human beings move through the world, there are several cognitive tools that can help us deal with the physiological and psychological effects of uncertainty. And we're going to talk about 3 of those today, 3 of those that I have personally found as an entrepreneur and as a mindfulness coach, and as someone who has spent a fair amount of time wading around in the deep, dark swamp of despair, are extremely helpful, not for making the deep, dark swamp of despair go away, but for helping us move through it so that we can move on to other things. And the 3 skills we're going to talk about today are mindfulness, resilience, and a growth mindset. So I encourage you, if you've ever heard of any of these 3 things, to, for a moment, just begin again. Let's start with a clean slate and define these for ourselves. So we'll begin with the first one. The first skill set is mindfulness. Now, I'd be curious to know, you guys out there in the chat box, I see you, and you guys here in the audience, if we want to throw the microphone around and just say, when you think of the word mindfulness, what is one word that comes to mind? No wrong answers here. I'm just curious, like, what your association is with the word mindfulness. I'm going to start at mine.
I think meditation.
Meditation, yeah, absolutely.
In the chat, we have quiet time.
Quiet time, yes, we think about quiet time, meditation, right? A lot of the times we think about mindfulness and we think of like the perfectly calm monk, like sitting at the top of the mountain in a deep thought, right?
Openness.
Yeah, openness, open awareness, love that, absolutely.
I think of observing, you're aware of what you're thinking.
Absolutely, observation, awareness of what you're thinking and feeling, totally.
I can feel it.
Yeah, you thought about yoga, absolutely, yeah. Deep thought, beautiful. Presence, I love this. Let's see what else we got here. Timothy said intentional. A wonderful intern at the Venture Café said insightful questions. Right, love all of these. Mindfulness is, in my personal opinion, the foundational tool for emotional intelligence because it's all of these things that you guys have said. It is awareness. Mindfulness is a tool for rational, and there should probably be a parentheses here that says more objective thinking. We can't have, as human beings, purely objective thought, right? We're always constantly filtering the sensory perceptions that come in through what we see, what we smell, what we taste, what we feel, what we hear, through our amygdala, right? That's the part of our brain that actually processes those sensory perceptions, and our hippocampus, which is the part of our brain that's responsible for memories and emotions. And so we might be looking out today in Philadelphia, if you're in Philadelphia, I'm looking outside and I'm like, wow, what a beautiful night, right? I can see the sun is starting to set, and maybe I have some beautiful memories of the sunset, and so I'm seeing that frequency of light, I'm seeing it cast up on these buildings, and I have this positive association. I think, oh, how wonderful. When we experience a moment, right, there's some part of us that's always going to have a subjective appreciation or distaste for that moment. But mindfulness is the practice, the action of attempting to observe as though we've never had an experience before. My favorite definition of mindfulness is by a man named James Baraz. And he says, mindfulness is noticing what is happening right now without wishing it were different. Enjoying the pleasant without holding on to it when it changes, which it will, and being with the unpleasant without worrying that it'll always be this way, which it won't. When we are experiencing a moment of uncertainty, wherever that lands on the spectrum, right? From what am I going to eat to lunch to what the heck am I doing with my life? Whenever we're experiencing a moment of uncertainty, we can use that as an opportunity to take a second and notice, okay, what's going on right now? What am I thinking? What am I feeling? How does it feel for my brain and body to have the reaction of fear, of uncertainty? Sometimes when we're not really in a moment of practicing mindfulness, we might not even realize that we're afraid of uncertainty, right? You might be sitting there and thinking, well, I'm not afraid of that, right? But when's the last time that when something uncertain happened, when you weren't sure what to do next, when you had the feeling of, I don't know, that you really sat and thought about what's going on with me right now? That practice of objective observation helps us to become better acquainted with what's actually happening in our brains and bodies. And when we become more aware of how our brains and bodies are reacting to a moment of stress, we gain the ability to change our actions. Instead of reacting to stress, we can notice that it's happening and choose our actions and our reactions to stressful situations. And that's why mindfulness is such an important part of being an entrepreneur. And it's also because when you're an entrepreneur, there are some days where you're like, man, this is the best day ever. Like, I crushed it today. I am just killing it. Look at me go. Oh my God, I'm going to tweet about this later. And there are some days where you're like, if I could never get out of this bed again, that would be great. And you need to be able as an entrepreneur not to feel good about all those moments. Remember, mindfulness isn't being peaceful. It's not being relaxed. I like to say you could be mindfully throwing a cup of coffee in somebody's face as long as you're just noticing the change of the weight distribution as the liquid leaves the cup, right? The ability to become aware and honest with ourselves, authentic, right? That was a word that came up when we talked about qualities of great leadership. That ability sets us apart as leaders and as entrepreneurs, and it enables us to move through times of uncertainty. So, the beautiful thing about mindfulness is that it is, in fact, a practice. And we can see from the research around mindfulness that it's actually a skill, just like learning how to write, just like learning how to walk, just like learning how to shoot a bow and arrow. Oftentimes, when we think, oh, I'm going to meditate, right, or I'm going to practice mindfulness, we sit down and we're like, okay, I'm going to think about nothing. All right. I'm thinking about nothing. Is that thinking about nothing? And we have this idea that we're bad at it somehow, right, that we failed. Well, let me put it to you this way. Me sitting here and telling you to think about nothing is like me sitting here and telling you not to think about a pineapple. What are you thinking about right now? A pineapple, right? So I encourage you to come to understand that a moment of mindfulness is just to notice what you're doing with your hands. A moment ago, you had hands and they were doing something. But that moment that you become aware of, oh yeah, right, I can feel my hands. This is what the chair feels like underneath of me. This is how deeply or shallow I am breathing right now. That's mindfulness. That's it. That's as complicated as it gets. You don't have to achieve anything. You don't have to get to anything. It's just that moment of becoming aware. And the more moments like that you have throughout your day, we can actually see changes in the brain to how our body reacts to stress, to how our body takes in new sensory inputs. So I'm going to teach you a really quick mindfulness exercise here. I know some of us here live have a little drink in our hands. I have a nice little glass of white wine right here. So if you have a drink, even if it's just a cup of water, that's great. You can use it. If you don't need it. All you need to do is take a second wherever you are. I'm going to ask you to take a big breath in. Take a big breath out. Do that a couple of times, just some deep breaths. And if you've ever wondered why breathing is such an important part of mindfulness, number one, it's because the more oxygen that your lungs bring into your bloodstream, that sends a signal to your brainstem that says, oh, it's time to relax. I can be okay now. And triggers your parasympathetic nervous response, your relaxation response. But also because your breath, When you're not thinking about it, it just feels like something that's happening to you. And as soon as you start thinking about it, it becomes something that you're doing. And that connection between the subconscious mind and the conscious mind, that is a moment of mindfulness. So wherever you are, take a couple deep breaths. And we're actually just going to pay attention to our 5 senses. So I want you to begin paying attention to your sense of touch. Now, maybe you begin just by noticing the feeling of what you're doing with your hands as you breathe. In through your nose, out through your nose and mouth. Just notice, what are you touching? Can you feel the temperature of your hands? Maybe you can even begin to become aware of the feeling of your clothing on your skin. Again, all sensations that were there a moment ago, but now are a little bit more present. If you want to try to close your eyes, this sometimes enables us to become a little bit more aware of the sensory perceptions that we're having besides our sight. So I invite you, if you feel comfortable, to close your eyes or take your gaze gently down to the floor and just notice, can you feel your eyelids on your eyes? Can you feel your tongue in your mouth? These are the sensations of touch. Your body's always taking in this sensory perception, but we only sometimes take a moment to be mindful of it. Next, as you breathe, become aware of your sense of sound. Listen to the sounds around you, wherever you are, whether you're in this room or you're sitting in your own home. And as you listen, you might notice at first your brain tries to label sounds, but consider that sound is just vibration moving through the air, hitting your eardrum like wind hits a sail. That vibrates your eardrum, sends a signal to the nerves in your ear, which sends a signal to your brain, and your brain processes that as sound, but it's just the same thing as wind hitting your skin. It's the sensation of hearing. Next, take a deep breath in through your nose, out through your nose or mouth. And on your next breath in, I want you just to pay attention to what you smell. Here, I just smell room smell. Maybe you're at home and you cook dinner. Maybe you can smell the beer in front of you. Whatever that is, just smell. Again, you're not looking for anything in particular. You're just noticing that sensation. Paying attention to something that you weren't paying attention to a moment ago. Next, I want you to just move your tongue around the inside of your mouth and see, what do you taste? Maybe just mouth. Maybe you just had a sip of beer. Maybe you even want to take a moment to take a sip of a beverage that you have and just really take a second to feel, what does taste feel like? And finally, if you haven't already, take a deep breath in, deep breath out, and gently allow your eyes to open, paying attention to what it feels like to let that light come back into your eyes. Noticing if you feel any different now than when you started. There's no sensation that you're supposed to feel or that you should feel. You know how I feel about the word should, but simply understanding that the practice of paying attention to something as physical as our 5 senses actually enables our brain to become more objective, to become less reactive to stress. This is the simplest tool for being really proficient at moving through uncertainty. It's kind of like lifting weights if you're a professional athlete, right? You don't lift weights just to lift weights unless you're that crazy guy who just deadlifted like 1,000 pounds, right? You lift weights so that when you go out to swing the tennis racket, you are strong, you're agile, you're moving. That's what the practice of mindfulness helps us to do. So, do we have any questions around mindfulness as our first skill? Oh, we're eager. We want to go. Feel free to throw them in the chat box if you have them. Okay, so our next skill is resilience. Resilience is a tool for embracing new challenges. So the definition of resilience, one of the definitions of resilience, this is actually from a body of research from the University of Wisconsin. They say that resilience is the rapidity at which we recover from adversity. When you're in the swamp and you step into a swampy puddle and your sock gets all wet, right? You need to know that you can take that sock off, shake it out, hang it over a tree, put it back on, and keep moving through the swamp, right? So that you don't sit down in the swamp and give up. So change and challenge are part of the process of entrepreneurship, part of beginning anything new. And so we have to learn tools for resilience that help us to change our reaction to adversity, right? There's that great bumper sticker, that classic bumper sticker that just says, shit happens, right? And I like to say, when we're thinking about resilience, shift happens. The shit's still gonna happen, but how we react to it can change. So the resilience exercise here is actually pretty simple. All I want you to do is think about something that you're doing right now in life, whether it's starting a business, whether it's a project that you're working on, a relationship that you're trying to improve or start or change. And I want you to think about something that you're afraid of failing at. Something in your life where you're starting it and you have a fear of like, I don't know how this is gonna go. Just think about it for a second. We all have it. It could be big, it could be small. Just something in your life where you're like, I might fail at this, and that kind of creeps me out a little bit. I like to say that success is a pretty bad metric of how you're doing because you can't practice success, right? Success is a multivariable outcome. Maybe it's a little bit of how you're doing. Maybe it's the weather that day. Maybe it's that you're trying to, sell something to someone and they stubbed their toe earlier that morning and they're just not really here for it, right? Success is not a great indicator of how you're doing, and we can't practice it, right? We can't manufacture success repeatedly because it has so many inputs, but we can practice courage. Courage is the moment when you feel a sense of fear, wherever that lands on the spectrum from small fears to large fears, and you do it anyway. So in that situation that you were thinking of, I want you to consider, instead of how do you want this to go, what's one thing tangibly that you could do to practice getting a better outcome? One input, not one output that you want, but one input that you could engage in that would create a better outcome. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that I'm trying to start a business. And I'm like, all right, well, I gotta go out and sell it's a B2B business and I'm selling a software to companies and I wanna have $500 million by the end of the year. Well, okay, let's take that out. Let's say I wanna sell $500,000 this year. That's my revenue goal. Okay, well, that's a great goal. One input that you can make towards that goal is I'm going to call 10 new people a day. Why is that such a scary feeling? Because in that action of practicing courage, you might get rejected when you make that call. You might fail. Maybe your goal isn't to make $500,000 at your new business this year. Maybe your goal is I want to learn how to ride a bike, right? One input that you can put into that is going and researching bikes online, right? Watching a YouTube video. When we start looking at the outcomes we want to achieve and breaking them down into things that we can practice, especially the things that make us feel a little bit freaked out, this is a practice of resilience. Because we can learn over time that we can count on ourselves to try, but we can't rely over time on a certain outcome because most outcomes have so many variables. So that's a tool that you can use whenever, even if you're just having one of those days of brain fog and you just want to sit down and not do anything and you don't know where to start, just say, okay, what's the ideal outcome? What is the smallest possible thing I can do right now to advance that outcome 1 inch? And that is the simplest tool for practicing resilience. All right. The third skill is growth mindset. So the simplest way to explain growth mindset is a tool for taking action in the face of failure, right? So once you already failed, when you're in a moment of failure and you're failing again and again and again, growth mindset helps us to move through those senses of failure. The easiest way to describe growth mindset is that growth mindset is the opposite of a fixed mindset. Fixed mindset is the belief that our attributes and our abilities are predetermined, right? We're this smart, we're this creative, which was a great word that we heard as like a quality of leadership. We're this good with people, we're this, athletic, right? What we find is, in fact, most of our abilities, including abilities that we hold really core to ourselves, like intelligence, are not fixed. We can learn them and we can grow and stretch our aptitudes and abilities in these things. And when I tell you that this is the most counterintuitive, countercultural fact, it's so true. We grow up believing, when you were young and you were really good at something, I mean, what's something you were really good at when you were young? Guitar. You were like, you're so talented. You're so talented at that, right? When we're good at something off the bat, people tell us we're talented. The worst is that when we're good at something because we practiced, people still tell us that we're talented. When in fact, you may have a certain level of aptitude to begin with, but the real determinant of success is what you put into that thing. And to reduce that down to the idea that you're talented neglects the fact that we can change, we can grow, we can learn. And so growth mindset, I like to say that you just have to be okay at sucking at something. If you can learn to be bad at something, you can learn to be great at anything. We're so afraid to be bad. We live in this culture that tells us either you're talented or you're not, you're smart or you're not, you're pretty or you're ugly, you're this or you're that. But the reality is that we can change so much about how we experience the world. Knowledge, experience, practice can literally change our brains, our personalities, our interests, our values. And so that learning to understand that we can approach anything in the world as a beginner, and that being a beginner and being bad at something is an incredibly positive quality, we can learn to do anything. And so my exercise for growth mindset is simply to learn, to find one new channel for learning. And so I'm going to give you a few of my favorite channels for learning because these might be inspirational for you. And I'd love to know if you want to throw in the chat box or if you have one, you want to raise your hand, let me know what your favorite channel of learning is. I'll take you through a few of my own. My one right now that I'm totally obsessed with is Blinkist. The first time I heard about it, I laughed. I was like, this is the stupidest thing in the world. It was like, hey, do you want to hear a nonfiction book crammed into 15 minutes of audio? It's like, no, I'll just read the book. Oh my God, it's changed my life. It is the coolest app. They don't pay me to say that, but they probably should. You go on and like any nonfiction book that you've ever dreamed of reading, these amazingly smart people of Blinkist have condensed that into 15 minutes, essentially audio spark notes of the book. And you can just blow through 10, 15 books. You know how that person that you met at that one happy hour was like, you should totally read that one book by that one guy. And you're like, okay, I'll put it on my list. And you never do it. Blinkist. You just learn it all. Just simply getting exposed to some of these concepts can inspire new ideas. It can inspire us to go and read the entire book. It can inspire us to learn new things about something that we've never thought we would learn before without needing to invest 8 hours in reading a book, 15 minutes in learning something new. That's a fan favorite. Another fan favorite is a good old TED Talk. TED Talks are amazing. 9 to 20-minute talks by incredible experts, neuroscientists, astronomers, photographers who have gone into the most incredible, amazing, heartbreaking places into the world and telling us about their life experiences. That's magical, right? We live in Philadelphia. I live in Philadelphia. We're all here in Philadelphia. If Ben Franklin had the ability to tap a metal box and a glass and lights and see any genius in the world talk to him for 20 minutes on any subject at the tip of his fingers, he'd probably literally die. It's just amazing, right? So TED Talks are awesome. Podcasts, there's pretty much a podcast on everything, whether you want to learn how to play Dungeons and Dragons or you want to learn about crypto investing, there's a podcast for that, right? Lunch Club is a really cool app where you can go on and just meet a professional. They'll just match you with a professional that you've never talked to. I talked to a guy today about his digital artwork and the future of workplace wellness, and it was amazing. Philly Startup Leaders, this is a great shout out for Philadelphia people. This is a startup network. If you're interested in startups, if you're part of the ecosystem, this is an awesome group. They have an accelerator program, they have learning events, they have social events. Go out and just meet people who are interested in the things that you're interested in. And of course, Audible, which is the long form version of Blinkist, actual audiobooks for those of us like me who sometimes just need something to do with their hands while they're learning things. So I'll like clean my house while I listen to a book. But these are a few of my favorites. Does anybody else have channels that they love?
We have in the chat Hidden Brain.
Yes. Hidden Brain is a podcast and it's awesome. If you like this conversation we're having today, you'll like the podcast Hidden Brain. That's a great one. Yeah, I love that. Anybody else have a channel, a learning channel that they love? We got one in the audience. I'm always excited to learn about new learning channels. Oh, here, use the microphone so our Zoom friends can hear you.
She's on a website. She did me one. She writes in-depth stuff. Amazing things.
Yeah. Yeah, but like there's so many of these amazing professionals out there who
We're
are
in the golden age of access to information.
yeah.
Okay, do this. Listen to it.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of the times we think we have to invest so much time in this, right? We have to invest so much energy in it. Just listen to a podcast, try out Hidden Brain, download Blinkist, try a free book, try the free version of Audible, right? One of the secrets of moving through the swamp is realizing that you don't have to know how to finish, you just have to know how to start, right?
I'm going to do one other explained on that.
Oh, Explained is great. It's a short documentary series on Netflix. Everything from why flags change the way we think about our nationality to how dogs can smell cancer. And it's totally awesome. It's a really, really good one. They also have a podcast called Unexplainable. Both are by Vox. It's really great. So we're here. We have our skill set. We have mindfulness. We have resilience. We have growth mindset. We're moving through the swamp. I want to now validate as we wrap things up that when we reach the other side of the swamp, we're not jumping and screaming of joy. We're thinking, okay, this still kind of sucks. I'm still doing something that's really hard. But once you get to this point, that's when you can really start to affect change. That's where you can get to the habit creation phase. There'll still be that moment where you're like, okay, why don't we just call it quits? That was hard, I learned a little thing, maybe I'll just call it quits here. But if we actually start putting into practice these skills, putting into practice the things we've learned, putting into practice this resilience, this mindfulness, these new things we've learned from Blinkist and Explained, right? That's when we start to be able to really reap the rewards of our action. And that's when we get to the end of the journey, which is not total ultimate success. It's just the ability to look back and say, this is one of the things that I am the most proud of. And I'll leave you with an awesome quote by William Feather, who says, success seems to be largely a matter of hanging on after others have let go. So that's it for today, guys. My name is Anna. I'm the founder and CEO of On the Go-Go. I would love to talk with you more, but thank you so much for coming. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you for being my first hybrid audience. And if you want to hang out and ask questions, whether you're virtual or you're in person, I would love to answer them. Thanks so much, guys.
Anna, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm feeling energized.
Good.
I'm feeling good. Does anyone in the physical or cyberspace have any questions for Anna? Or we just leave it an incredible hype. We have thank yous in the chat.
Oh, thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in. It was nice to see you. Yeah. How do you handle information overload? So,
All these things are great. It's like,
oh my God. So,
all this stuff.
yeah. So, here's the beauty of it, right? One of the experience of information overload, right? We're having that experience all the time. Our brain processes just millions of pieces of sensory information every second. but we can only experience a handful consciously, right? So when we enter a space, a moment, a workshop, a lifetime thinking, I have to retain all of this information and implement it all right now, what's that going to do? It's going to result in this sense of stress, right? Because stress comes when we have, stress is our body's response to any demand, right? And so when we have all these demands, oh my God, now there's all this cool new information that I have to learn how to implement right away. Just take that demand right off. What's one thing, right? That smallest possible thing that you can learn how to implement. Think about one thing. You're not going to remember all 45 minutes of me talking to you for today. What's one thing that you're going to remember that maybe you're going to carry with you, and in a week you're going to be like, oh yeah, that girl, I don't even remember her name. She was wearing like a blue and white shirt. She was telling me about growth mindset. Oh, I'm going to Google growth mindset. That's it. And the key is remembering that that is enough, for sure. Yeah, great question. Anybody else have questions?
I
Yeah.
have that question about these condensed books.
Yeah.
You can take like Moby Dick and show you some 15-minute version.
I will say that's a great question. And the audience is saying, let's talk about these condensed books. Could you actually condense Moby Dick into 15 minutes? Someone's probably done it, but this app usually talks about nonfiction books. So they really distill, not the elegance of like really incredible prose.
Like showing big white whales.
Right, totally, no, just nonfiction books where it really can be distilled to ideas and concepts. Yeah, that's a great question too. Although I think that would be funny if they tried to do fiction books. That'd be a hoot. All right, well, thanks for coming, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Have a great night, everyone.
Have a good night, everyone.